Hi, guys, and welcome to the House Call Vet Cafe podcast. I'm Dr. Eve Harrison. I'm a full-time integrative concierge house call veterinarian in Los Angeles, and I help other vets to build their unique mobile practices on their terms. This podcast is for and by house call and mobile veterinarians, so it is meant to give our community a platform to connect, to share our stories, to lift each other up, and to support each other. Most of us work solo as lone wolves, right? So for me, it's been really powerful to be able to physically hear the voices of my colleagues from all over the world and to get a chance to feel that we truly are part of a community of very real other human beings who get it. While you may be alone in that little bubble of your own vehicle when you're on the road seeing patients, I welcome you to join our community by tuning into our own podcast when you're on your way to your next house call. Whether you're a super experienced house call vet with 30 years of experience, you're a brand new prospective house call vet just looking to get started, or you're house call curious, there will be something for you in this podcast. Each episode, you will hear interviews from other mobile veterinarians just like yourself who are doing unique and innovative things, vets who are sharing their stories, their struggles and challenges, and you can also look forward to hearing valuable information and perspectives from specialists and experts outside of our micro niche. And finally, if becoming a house call veterinarian is something that you've been thinking about exploring, or you're looking for some extra support getting your own mobile practice to feel more profitable and sustainable for you, check out the information in the show notes about my course and our above and beyond supportive private community for members only, plus our monthly group coaching sessions within the House Call Vet Academy. You can also check out my free public Facebook group, which is also called the House Call Vet Cafe, the same name as this podcast, and which is a warm and cozy community for mobile vets to support each other in professional and personal development, in creative entrepreneurship, and in friendship. So thank you guys for spending time with me today. Let's dive into the episode. Hi, everyone. Today we have Dr. Amanda Doran here with us. She is one of my favorite people for a variety of reasons. She does her work as an artist, as an author, as a speaker, gardener. She's a kitchen magician. She is also a practicing in-home euthanasia veterinarian. Amanda's art, her writing, her speaking, they all focus on the ethics of and the operations for end-of-life care for humans and animals, effective intrapersonal and interpersonal communication strategies, and how to find work-life resonance. It's different from work-life balance, but it's similar. So she also facilitates creative learning groups and workshops. Duluth, Minnesota is her home, which she just told me how to pronounce Duluth. I realized I never said that word before. So she lives in Duluth, Minnesota, where she resides with her partner, her two dogs, and many, many house plants. She also slings tarot cards for fun and secretly wishes that the neighborhood kids would think that she's a witch, the good kind, they hope. So thank you so much for being with me, Amanda. You're one of the coolest people ever. I think I said that. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. That's so nice of you to say. And sorry for that very long run-on sentence. I need to work on that, but appreciate your bio.
I'm a fan of run-on sentences. I like them, honestly.
It's hard because like I want to like share some things, but not too many things, but like some things.
That's right. So I wanted to start out how I always start out, and I wanted to ask you, what is your favorite snack to eat in the car while you're on the way to house calls? Or I don't know, maybe IHE vets don't snack in the car. I don't know.
It depends on the day. I think it kind of depends like how full the day is. So like most of my appointments are like in 2-hour blocks, and a lot of times they're within like 15 to 30-minute drive of my house, and I'll take up to 4 a day. So if it's a loaded day, like I'm starting it off with like everything all ready to go, because like I do not want to eat gas station pizza. Like that is not a good life choice. So I like to make what's called these little like bento boxes, and so try to make like things that are easy to eat, and maybe I can just like shove in my mouth really fast, but like are actually real food. And sometimes that is hard to do. But I like to do like hard-boiled eggs and like chicken breasts, or like berries and like broccoli and carrots and like hummus. Maybe not all these things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Or like make little pre-made ants on a log. Like that's really fun if I'm feeling fancy.
What's ants on a log?
oh my gosh, it's the best thing ever. So it's a celery with like a nut butter of choice and some sort of like small dehydrated fruit. So like traditionally it would be like peanut butter and raisins, but sometimes I get a little wild and do like almond butter and currants. But it's like the best thing ever. Never had it so long. That might be a Minnesota thing.
Minnesota. Wait, say that word again.
Don't.
They're maybe making fun of you in this episode and enjoying your amazing accent. I love it. It's the cutest.
It's a bit Canadian too, because I lived there for 5 years. So I definitely do still like drop A's sometimes without noticing it. Yeah.
Oh, I thought I picked up some Canadian. That's awesome.
Some Canadian. Yeah, but like those are my favorite. The ants on a log, or sometimes even just like an apple and then like those little peanut butter packets, like little quick like apple and then like that's kind of a fun thing to do. Like, you know, I'm talking about like the little RX bar ones or like the thins, like maple peanut butter or whatever.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, it can't be too complicated. I feel like snacks on the road.
Your ants on a log seem very well thought out, though. That sounds delicious. And it does sound easy to eat. I like your bento box idea, too.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're welcome. So can you tell me a little bit about how you decided to embark on the journey of becoming a house call vet or an in-home euthanasia provider? And how did you follow through with that decision? And I know you work for a group. I would love to just hear your story a little bit around that.
Yeah, I love, I listened to your intro podcast too, and I think it's interesting, like the parallels of like how we got here, like definitely not something I ever imagined doing when I graduated 10 years ago. And yeah, like I didn't even really know it was a thing like 10 years ago. And in my first job I did like mixed animal practice up in Canada, up in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and ended up like helping quite a few people at home with euthanasias, because as a large animal vet you could do like vaccines for like animals who wouldn't otherwise come to clinic, like farm dogs and farm cats, and then we were able to do like at home euthanasia. And I just remember this being like such a different feeling. And like a year prior, like I had euthanized like my heart dog like at the emergency clinic when I was in like my third year of vet school, and just like, wow, like this is so different. And I remember like joking about like, oh, I would love to like do this, like just this, like all day, every day. And like, that would be okay. And I felt like a total weirdo saying that. Yeah, I don't know. I think over time, like I was kind of like drawn more and more to like those end of life appointments because they were so different. And I also kind of felt like I didn't have to tell people what to do. Like they already knew like what they were going to do. It was kind of just a matter of like opening up like a portal for them essentially, like to be able to do it. And yeah, so I was in Canada for about 5 years and then came back to the States and did small animal practice for a couple of years, and I was able to do kind of end of life care stuff a little bit, but I found myself like really wanting more. And at that point I went to I got this tripping over my words HPC. I got really into the IHPC and the hospice and palliative care, and got a hospice and palliative care certification, and started doing kind of my own like hospice visits in the clinic, and like made a special code. And I found myself like wanting to do more of that and like less of all the other things. And so I kind of got this like wild hair, and like I never imagined that I would ever have a business at all. I think the story that I told myself like in undergrad and vet school is like, I don't want to own a practice. Like those people are miserable.
Right. I told myself the same story. I swear I did.
Yeah. But I think it was so amazing. Like once I really like, I took like one step forward and like opened myself up to that idea. And it was like the universe took like 10 steps towards me. Like it was amazing. Like I went to a conference and met all these people, and I came back and was like, I'm going to start my own business. Like I'm going to move to Duluth. I was living like 2 hours away in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Not to be confused with Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Thank you for that clarification.
Like fun fact. But yeah, I decided I was like, I'm going to start my own business. And then I ended up reaching out to like the people I work for now. And at that point they were doing these marketing like startup packages for other like mobile vets. And they were kind of like, well, like, we're kind of thinking about expanding. Like, would you want to like do that here with us? And I was like, yeah, because I was feeling very overwhelmed about like all the things. And I do kind of wonder, I was thinking about this today, like if the House Call Vet Academy had existed at that time, like may have things turned out very differently. But like, I don't have to do any of the business things and I can do it now. Like, I don't have to figure this all out and do it for a year. And that was kind of hard because I also knew that they weren't doing hospice. And so it was kind of this like really big decision to make. And yeah, I feel like I definitely made the right one. I could not imagine like, so that was right about 3 years ago is when I kind of like reached out to them. And so it's been about 2.5 years since I started, and we do still do quality of life consultations. So I do feel like I really am able to use like that hospice and palliative care certification, even though I don't technically do hospice care. And yeah, it felt really rewarding to be able to kind of open up this opportunity like in the place where I live. So a super non-traditional path to get here. The company I work for has been around for like 10 years, and we have 15 vets down in like Minneapolis, and St. Paul is like the big city. And then I'm 2.5 hours north up in Duluth, and there's about, I don't know, maybe I think it's like 150 to 200,000 people like in our service area. And it's just me here. And so I've been able to kind of make my own schedule here, and was an independent contractor for a while. And then for the first 2 years, I worked 1 to 2 days down in the big city because I was like, I'm done with practice. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. I would rather drive 5 hours round trip and go work down there. And that was really awesome, kind of learning like, how does the company work? And like, how do I translate this into what I'm doing? Because the hope is like down the road, it'll continue to grow and we'll hire other veterinarians here. So that's been really interesting and really different. And when I talk to other people, it's like, oh, I made my own job and nobody else does exactly what I do.
Right.
And yeah, like sometimes it feels weird. And I think sometimes there is this impression that like from clients of like, oh, are you actually a veterinarian? And like, like, oh, are you practicing? And it's like, well, this is still practice. And
It is.
yeah, and it's also like, it's all the things that I really like about it. Like when I was a kid and I want to be a veterinarian, like, I don't know about you, but like having a little doctor kid, I was like, I want to play with the stethoscope and like needles and syringes.
That's IHE for you in a nutshell. That's like those are the tools of IHE trade. That's it.
Skills, yeah. But then at the same time, it like every experience is different, and it is the worst day of people's lives. And sometimes, yeah, it totally sucks, but at the same time, like it's so beautiful, like just to be able to like give them that experience. And like I worked in emergency and general practice for like a long time. Like I think I've been in the industry like almost 20 years, and so like seen a lot of ways that it can go. And like it's so different. It's so different at home versus in the clinic or like an emergency. And like last thing anybody wants to do is end up at the emergency clinic in the middle of the night. And so yeah, I know sometimes I'm just like, holy moly, like I'm living the dream. And
Yeah.
all rainbows and butterflies, like it's really hard. Yeah, that's how I got here.
That's a great story. I relate to so much of that. And I agree, like what resonated for me, speaking of work-life resonance, I guess this is work-life resonance. How you said it just can be such a beautiful experience, and how you're opening up a portal for people.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you got your IAAHPC certification and kind of leaned into that and nourished yourself in the ways that felt, authentic and natural for you. And how you said, I loved how you said, I opened one door and however many doors you said opened up for you. I so relate to, it's such an interesting thing when you're like living your life in alignment, and you've kind of like taken the first steps to live your true life, your best self, as they say. And, the thing that you're just meant to do, this thing, once you start on that path, those doors just open, the path appears. They also say once, what is the expression? Like once you start walking, the path appears. And, that's only if you're on the right path. And it sounds like you really found that. And there's just so much about you that, from our friendship and our connection, I know that this sort of like depth of reality, and this sort of not black and white, this sort of gray area there's so much beauty in it. And I love how you always sort of embrace that and, help to make other people's lives better because of it. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your certification in palliative care.
Yeah.
What has that meant for your patients and for your career? I'm just really curious to hear how that might have helped or what it brings to the table.
Oh my gosh. I feel like that course, changed, my life, how I practice and how I view, everything. I think in Western medicine, we're definitely taught, kind of that paternal role model of medicine. I think
Yeah.
historically, the doctor has been the person who tells you what to do. And I always just felt really uncomfortable with that, because I was I don't know what to do. And I'm the kind of person where I will think of every possible outcome to any situation.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think even though I don't actively practice hospice and palliative care, I use these tools every single day, the communication training that we did. There was a hands-on lab that we did with CADA. I know I could still do my job.
Love CADA. Yay.
Oh gosh, everything I know from CADA. Yeah, I feel I wouldn't be able to do my job as well. And yeah, it really kind of taught me this process of approaching these difficult problems and kind of recognizing what are the different levels of truth that are happening here, and how do I open up that path kind of as a magical guide, essentially, for the pet owners. And so kind of moving towards more a partnership model of medicine, where we're kind of moving back and forth. And I feel the most liberating day of my career was when I realized oh my gosh, I don't need to tell people what to do. My job is to make sure they know all the options that they have and help them figure out what the best thing for them to do is. And I was oh, my problems are over. I think I realized this halfway through the certification. And yeah, and it just kind of opened up this whole world, and it kind of got me more able to see on a communication level, in a lot of relationships, as far as what is my personal truth, and how do I remove that but also honor it, and also to see what is this other person's personal truth. And then at the same time, can we look at what is the universal level of truth here, what is actually going on from a scientific level, and really to be able to explain that to people, this is what's happening, let me help you pull out your personal truth and remove mine from it, and then help you kind of go down the path like information station.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Holding that duality of multiple truths at one time and honoring your truth and their truth, and that sort of pressure of I always kind of call it the vet gods. I've always felt it as the vet gods looking down on me, looking over my shoulder. Are you doing the right thing? Are you telling the client what they need to do? And it's I've always fought that in myself, that I have my truth, they have their truth, they're both true, and both we're both deserve our validation for our experience in this moment. And I think the way you describe that is just so beautiful, that it's not about the vet gods. We're all our own personal wizards, as you say, and our wizardry can coexist. And it's just a beautiful way of weaving in truth and the greater I guess understanding of reality and universe. I love how you take it to this sort of metaphysical level. And I mean, what could be more metaphysical than end of life, right?
It's been an awakening, for sure. And I feel especially since now doing just what I do, there's no such thing as routine. Every situation is different. And I think that's kind of what life is about too, is kind of letting go of our ideas of the way that things should be, while at the same time taking care of ourselves and saying okay, here's where I begin and I end, and this is what I need, while also not taking power away from others, and recognizing the moments when we give our power away, and that we are doing magic all the time, even if we don't really realize it. So I feel in a lot of ways that's been a big metaphor for me, and kind of reminding me this is why I do this work, and that really helps me keep going and do it in a way that's sustainable, because I think for a long time I felt like this like great amount of like dis-ease like with my work, because I felt like I think this is something that you talked about in yours too, of like my beliefs and my values like didn't line up with what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of is what that idea, like this idea of like work-life resonance is like,
Right.
you know, we think of like music and like we are an instrument and we got a song to sing, and like if there's something wrong with your flute, like you're gonna hear it and it's gonna sound awful.
Right.
And like we need to get that fixed, you know? And so I think if you do feel like this sense of like dis-ease or like discomfort in your life, like that's telling you like you're out of resonance. Like and I think you even kind of touched on this with thinking about, oh, sorry, I forgot to turn my notifications off, a little bang there. Where like, yeah, like if you, even if you like you're working in a place where like you feel like, oh, there's something just not quite right, it's because you're not in resonance, like you're not kind of at that same level. And I think that's kind of what life is like, you know, and sometimes it feels like maybe we're on a detour or we're not on the right path. I think we're always on the right path. Just sometimes like we start off with the little recorder and we got to work up to like the fancy like piccolo.
You're meeting me at my level, girl.
I played
love
flute
this.
as a young person as well, so I feel like
Did you?
I did, just for a couple of years though. I didn't want to.
Oh, no.
Like, there was a flute in the family, and so that is what I played, and I've healed from it, but I ended up playing percussion later. But I was very much like I had resentment.
Oh, you had flute resentment.
I had flute resentment. Like if I could go back in time, like I definitely would have like practiced, because it's a very beautiful instrument. But I think I was really self-conscious and I felt like really nerdy. And like my friends were playing the trumpet and I really wanted to do that, but I didn't. So that's a story for another time. But
Yeah.
I did once play flute in middle school for a couple of years, and then I was asked not to come if I wouldn't practice.
Oh. You are absolutely adorable. I'm like, I love you even more knowing that you're a flute sister. I know it wasn't your instrument. It didn't resonate with you. It didn't feel right. Got it. But still, you have a little bit of flute DNA in there. I know it. And
I'm not opposed to going back and doing it. So maybe someday I'll pick one up again.
Fantastic. So I'm always up for a little flute and music detour. And so coming back a little bit to the IHE experience, you're an experienced IHE provider, you have additional certifications and everything, and this is your primary way of practicing now, and it's very aligned for you and resonant, all of that stuff. And so I'd love to know if you wouldn't mind sharing with our people some of your favorite pre-med protocols. Have you found any that have been particularly helpful, particularly troublesome? How do you avoid those sort of like moments where the pre-med stings and you know that can be very upsetting to, you know, an caregiver in the last moments of the animal's life, and some people have true honest to God trauma from that. How do you work with that? How do you avoid that with either your med choices, your wording, your language, your general amazing and calming presence? How do you do it?
Yeah, I think this is one of like the hardest things of all time, and like everybody asks about it, and I wish I had like a straightforward answer. I feel like this is definitely one of the things where like if there was a right way to do it, everybody would do the same thing. And it's also something that's evolved a lot like over the last like 10 years. I remember when I first started, like I would just give like everybody like sub-Q like Torbinase, because like nobody else that I worked with did it, and like that's like what I knew how to do. These days and for the last couple of years, like I'm a big fan of just like anesthetizing everybody, so like everybody gets the dissociative, just in case you need to move to something like an intra-organ technique. Like I don't get the vein on every try. Like some animals have like really awful veins.
Yeah.
And yeah, I want to give myself every advantage and make it as peaceful as possible. So in the beginning, kind of, I used to use Tilazol, and I had a bit of a love-hate relationship with it, and I've really gotten away from it. I know some people are able to add things and reduce the sting. Some people don't have a problem with it, but I have had a couple out of like hundreds, but like that's enough, that have had those really bad reactions where it's like usually a cat, and they scream.
Yeah.
One of the first times I used it for a pre-med for a dog, it was still in practice, and I think I wimped out and didn't give him enough, and he got super dysphoric, and it was like this little pug, and he started like running around the room and like pooping everywhere, and it was like the worst thing ever. We had to give him more drugs, and so like those are the things we definitely want to avoid, especially if you're at home and there's nobody with you.
Yeah.
So I tend to a groaning dog.
Oh.
I tend to like go on like on the heavy side of the dose, but also like everybody's a little bit different. So
Yeah.
these days, like for most dogs, what I do, like, or like for all dogs, like pretty much like everybody gets like a sub-Q injection of a combination of ketamine, torb, xylazine, and ACE. So for like a 10-pound dog, I would do, it's like 0.1 per 10 pounds. So like, yeah, 10-pound dog would get like 0.35 mils. And then, so ACE is half of that. Does that make sense? So like a
Okay.
100-pound dog would be like 0.1 of each. Or no, sorry. 100-pound dog would be 1 mil of each ketamine, torb, and xylazine, and then like a half a mil of ACE,
Got
versus like
it.
a 10-pound dog would be like 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, 0.05.
Got it. Got
So
it.
sub-Q. If it's a huge dog and it's a huge amount, like I'll split it up in a couple spots. But like then what I say to people is, so this first medicine that we're going to give is essentially the same thing they would get if we were going to do surgery today. To them, it's going to feel like a vaccine would. And I use a teeny tiny, like I use like a 25 gauge needle. It says a baby kitten vaccine needle. Some animals don't even notice it. Like I definitely encourage people to give like treats or forbidden people food, especially like chocolate or like a jar of peanut butter or a stick of butter or like a whole tub of ice cream or like a bunch of bacon grease. Like sky's the limit. And I love being like one of the few vets on the planet that can be like, yeah, give them all the chocolate. And like people take so much joy in that, because like not everybody wants to eat, but that's a really fun thing to do. But if they don't, that's okay too. And then I'll kind of talk them through like, this is what's going to happen. Like, and everybody kind of gets a different speech. Like some people don't want to hear it. Some people are like, let's just get this over with. And some people want to know everything. So kind of gauging that, and then saying, so most animals will fall asleep in about 5 to 10 minutes, but everybody's a little bit different. Some animals fall asleep really fast. Sometimes we need to give them a little bit more medicine to help them find that deep, deep, comfortable sleep. And I really try to keep like positive language.
Yeah.
Because they say people aren't going to remember what you say or what you do. They're going to remember how you feel.
Yeah, Maya
Or how they
Angelou.
feel.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that
Yeah,
is Andrew. That's right.
that's right.
Yeah, and so I try to use like the smallest volume, the smallest needle, like go sub-Q when I can, try to distract them, and try to avoid poking them more than once with the sedation. And then, yeah, sometimes I'll step out of the room, especially now with COVID, like people give them a chance, like give them kisses and have their masks off, and let's go like work on logging the drugs or something, and then come back. And then yeah, for kitties, I used to use like Tilazol and Torb and Ace kind of mixed together, and I don't like that one bit. For kitties now, a lot of times we'll do like Ace and Torb and then kind of top them off with some alfaxolone to help them get to that deep, comfy sleep. Yeah, I wish there was like a formula, like a chart. I think a lot of it is like trial and error and kind of figuring out like what you feel most comfortable with. The other thing is like I use butterfly catheters to do like final injection administration. There's some people still do catheters, like taped in ones. And so that makes it a little different, like what options you have too. I don't have somebody with, and so I think that might be really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there was a right way to do it, everyone would do the same thing. And I think the most important thing is that animals as comfortable as they can possibly be, and really reassuring that to the owner. And so, yeah, sometimes they do cry out, and I usually like have a little bit of self-depreciating humor to kind of help like diffuse the situation. Be like, well, I would probably have something to say too if some weird lady came over and gave me a bite in the butt while I was just trying to snuggle with my mom and have snacks, or something like that, just to kind of like diffuse the situation a little bit. And like, yeah, especially like if an animal is really sensitive or painful, like they might react, or if it's an animal that would normally react, like they're probably going to. And then also just kind of reassuring, like from their perspective, like that's the worst part. Like now some awesome pain medicine is going to start to work. they're going to feel really, really good and start to get really relaxed. And yeah, by the time we get to do the second medicine, they're going to be having these wonderful doggy dreams. And yeah, just really like almost trying to like narrate the experience to kind of help create like the imagery that the client is going to remember.
Beautiful.
Sedation nutshell.
Yeah, it's a good nutshell. Thank you for sharing so generously your protocols and your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think it's one of the most common questions that I see and that people come to me with. What sedation protocol? How do you avoid that sting? And you're absolutely right. If there were one way that worked, we would all be doing it. And every animal is different. Every caregiver is different in their expectations. And it's just a dance. It's really an individual thing. And what might feel right in one person's hands might not feel so comfortable in another's. You know, it all has to do with your injection technique, what needle you're using, how you've prepared everyone for what's to happen. And so I love the way you, your compassion and kindness and clarity of communication and holding space for people, it shines through. So thank you for sharing that, all of those nuggets of wisdom.
Thank you.
So moving in a slightly different direction, you're doing some really, really awesome stuff outside of being a vet. And I really relate to how you have this sort of vibrant life outside of being a vet. Can you tell me a little about some of your projects that you're working on and what they mean to you?
I sure can. And I can tell you too that like it definitely was not always this way. When I started doing exclusively in-home euthanasia, I always kind of had the option to pursue hospice and palliative care endeavors. And definitely there's been like many larval stages like behind the scenes of like what that
larval stages. Ew.
But definitely like the butterfly has come. And yeah, I always kind of knew I wanted to do like something in addition to that. It's like I was like, I can't do this like full time. So I do the in-home euthanasia 3/4 of the time. And then kind of the evolution of the something else has been like kind of started off, I had all set up to do online telehealth consultation business for pet owners. And this was like March 2020. And I encountered a little bit of resistance with my local board. And then the pandemic hit and I was kind of like, this is not a mountain I want to die on. So I moved on and started working on with another colleague, the Morning Pause Project, which was like a grief journaling course. And I realized like I wasn't really a good fit to do that. Like that's definitely something that needed like social work, people involved, and ended up stepping away from that project. And it's going to go on to have another life. And so that's very exciting. And so I feel like I'm an entrepreneur. Like I had a failed business and now I have sold a business. And really kind of imagining like, okay, what do I want to do? And I've done some speaking with end of life care and veterinary things. And I was working with IHPC and like planning a conference, and it just kind of got to the point where it was like, this is like too much end of life care, and just was starting to kind of feel burnt out about it. And my kitty died last summer.
I'm sorry.
July 2022. Yeah, it was really hard, but it was also like another like awakening, kind of like almost a rebirth in some ways, and kind of realizing that my calling was maybe a little bit higher than that. Like it was a little bit like beyond like veterinary medicine. And I feel like it kind of brought me to this like really, really dark place, and kind of like, who am I? Like, you know, why am I having such a hard time with this? Like, and like, it makes me giggle a little bit to look back and be like, you know, yeah, like I'm a person that does this all the time. Like, why am I having such a hard time? It's like, well, because you're human and this is your buddy, right, and like she's been with you forever. But yeah, it really kind of helped me kind of start to tap into like, well, who am I? And like was kind of starting to realize like, oh, like going to in-home euthanasia practice like hasn't solved all of my problems, and really kind of started to embrace like these other parts of myself that I felt like I kind of had to leave behind in order to be a veterinarian. And started going to therapy and taking better care of my body, and like eating real food and like exercising again, and like reading for pleasure, and like all these things that seem so logical, but I think we get so consumed like in like our work, like sometimes we forget about that. And like I think the biggest thing was beyond like that physical care is really needing kind of like mental health care, like and just kind of figuring out like where do I go from here, and really kind of just started to tap into like my creative side. And when I was a kid, like I wanted to be an artist, but kind of the impression I got from society was that that's something that people only did if they were like independently wealthy or like severely mentally ill and like homeless on the street, which isn't true, but it's like these stories that we tell ourselves. And like that was better to be, if you're going to be an artist, that should be like a hobby or like something you do on the side, or maybe be like an art teacher. And that I was really smart and like knew a lot about science and math, and so I should maybe go kind of this path. And I think I was maybe kind of having some resentments of like, why wasn't I allowed to be an artist? But it's also like, well, like you wouldn't be here now if all those things hadn't happened. So it was almost like this kind of like soul reclamation kind of thing, and kind of embracing these parts of myself that like felt really taboo and like I wasn't allowed to be. It really felt like this like Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing. So really like last year I started taking these like online community education classes in writing and art, and it was just the funnest thing ever of all time. And I felt like just like a new person, and like I had like reclaimed this part of myself, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I had to leave these parts behind to be a vet. And and part of that was really related to like kind of tuning more into like nature and like the cycles of like the moon and like the seasons, and kind of really realizing that like as a kid, like I was really interested in like magic and like witches and like kind of like more like occult and like mystic kind of things, and even just kind of starting to like explore some of these things that I didn't think I could do. Or like if people knew I liked these things, like I would not be like a reliable professional. Like people would not trust me to come to their homes and euthanize their pets if they knew that sometimes I like to have bonfires and howl at the moon. I was like, oh, that's just not true. And it's like, I think in some ways for me, it has been kind of this like return to like a spiritual path. And like, I don't consider it to be like a religious sort of thing, but I think in doing kind of this work around death, like there definitely is like this sense of like connection to something greater than yourself. And I think I always had a hard time like putting words to that, because some of the examples I had as a young person were negative. And so really kind of trying to start redefine that. And a bunch of people told me about this course called The Artist's Way by this woman named Julia Cameron. And it's, she kind of takes you through like this 12-week course of like kind of reclaiming a path to like spiritual creativity. And so like 4 people told me about this. I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And so I did it this summer, and it was pretty much the best thing ever. And it made me realize like, okay, like I do want to start a business, but what I would really like to do is open a coffee shop eventually, like an occult bookstore. And that's probably a 5 to 10 year plan. So if I want to start to break that apart, like I'm going to start doing a farmer's market stand this year and make an Etsy store. And I'm like, oh my God, like I did not know I wanted to do these things, but also it makes me feel like alive to like have that passion, like to be able to have that thing to follow. Like I think I always thought that like my purpose was like a job or like a place or like a thing, but it's really like this feeling that you follow. And I think that's kind of what that work-life resonance is if you're feeling that kind of feeling of like, like something's not quite right here, is like that's your body and like the universe trying to tell you that like there's not, like it's like an action potential that's like building inside of you. And when you get to the point where you can't take it anymore, like you will take action. And I feel like in some ways like art has felt like that, like it's this thing that's been like contained for so long, and now it's like this way to like express myself. And so working on my farmers market stand for this summer and getting my garden ready and making a little Etsy store, and have this dream apparently open like a coffee shop occult bookstore. And that might change, but like it's really fun to think about and not something that I would ever imagine. And so this artist way is kind of this way to identify what your negative core beliefs are. And I really like it that she describes it as having coffee with your shadow, which like kind of lines up along the house called Vet Cafe. And then you also take yourself on artist dates. And so it's this like 1 to 2 hours you set aside to like enchant yourself like every week or two. And there's like, it's whatever you want. Like maybe you want to repot your plants or take yourself out for a special walk or go to the craft store, like whatever. And so, yeah, started a group with that, starting to do some courses with that and kind
So
of.
you've started, just to clarify, you've actually started a group now kind of based off of that and
Yes.
and encourage, creating space for people to explore their inner artist and take
Yeah.
themselves. Okay, so that's really awesome. That's
Yes.
really awesome. Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that.
Thank you for helping me direct that way. Yes, so that is so exciting. So yeah, I feel like moral of the story is kind of my platform has shifted over time to educating others about end of life care, to helping teach other people how to let themselves be more creative. And I think it's not just limited to veterinarians. I think it's something we could all use a little bit more of in our lives. So yes, I have started like anybody who wants to come and live a little bit more creative, magical life, a Facebook group. I think it's called the 2022 Artist Way Creative Circle. There's a link for it on my bio in the Instagrams.
Excellent.
And so that one's kind of just like a self-study kind of place. Like if people are interested in like, what are these, the morning pages are like the daily writing you do, the coffee with the shadow, like what is this artist date? And then my plan is, because I love this course so much and it's helped me so much, is to do it like a few times a year. So a couple of weeks ago, I started the first cohort. So I have a group of 6 self-described quirky introverts who do extroverted things, who are, there's like all different backgrounds, and everybody's kind of working on different things, and we work on the stuff ourselves and then check in once a week, so kind of supporting each other through that. The next one is going to start May 1st, so keep people posted about that in that group. Yeah, it's really fun and definitely like a student of the work, and it's kind of selfish because like my goal is like to get to know myself better and also like get to know like more creative people. But I think definitely like in this time, like in the world, like we really need this. Like this is definitely like a time of healing, and like this is the new normal. I think we're kind of at that point where like kind of realizing like things are never going to be how they were. And yeah, like the best way that we can take care of each other is to take care of ourselves and really kind of realize like what are those stories that we tell ourselves, and like how do we take better care of ourselves so that we can show up for ourselves and for our clients. And so
That's
I feel
right.
like that's kind of what drives me to do that. It's like I
Mhm.
want to be able to continue to do in-home euthanasia sustainably, and kind of realizing like, people ask like, how do you do this? It's like, well, this is how I do it.
You take care of yourself and you acknowledge the parts of you that make you whole. I love that. I love that. And I mean, it really all ties together. I always say that, I consider myself an integrative or holistic practitioner. And part of that is caring for myself, because if I'm not whole, if I'm not okay, how am I going to give from from a
Yeah,
place of not plenty, right?
yeah.
Um,
Can't pour from an empty cup.
that's right. And so I love what you're doing, because I also am a massive fan of Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. I never took her course, but I read her book before vet school, and I read it as kind of on a similar path that you were on. You can't be a musician, that's not a real thing. And I struggled with that, and I also had a lot of resentment that I didn't go down that path. So I relate to your kind of inner child artist type of thing that's just now having a chance to shine. And we've talked about this before today, and you kind of reminded me at a time that I was kind of down and weak and confused that, you had this really amazing way of explaining that we're so much more than veterinarians. We're not our practices. We can start to think this is our identity, and if that fails, we have a failed business, or we don't enjoy being a veterinarian. Who are we anymore at all? And I loved kind of how you explained that, and I think I heard a little bit of that thread in what you just said, that sort of like uncoupling of career from identity and embracing something a little deeper, which might be our artistry. It might be our, innate desire to create or art, music, express ourselves in some way that's been suppressed as a result of our veterinary training. And so I wanted to thank you for reminding me of that at a time when I was confused. And I love that you were able to kind of touch on it here in your story too. And so in general, you're really good at kind of this weaving of spirituality and wizardry and, kind of the big picture into some of the hardships of veterinary medicine and really, all of life. And so another amazing conversation that we had was, again, where you reminded me that I'm a powerful wizard. We touched on that a little bit before. And your way of explaining that just really kind of touched me and helped remind me that sometimes it's like a bit of playfulness, a little creativity, thinking outside the box. That might be that sort of like key, that might be the portal to handling these hard things and sustainability of our work. And being a vet is, by the standards of most people, one of those really hard things. And so I think your unique voice and your twist on things and bringing a little bit of magic and playfulness and creativity and fun, play, it's really play. Humans need play, just like every animal needs play. And I think, that sort of take on things, it's been very helpful for me when we've had conversations together. And I think it's got to be helpful for other vets out there too. And so you touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you might be able to kind of tell me how you apply this kind of thinking to your practice as a veterinarian. Like kind of how do you integrate that?
Yeah. One of the things that makes me really think about is I heard Jessica Vogel speak a couple years ago about kind of the hero's journey and how so often like we try to like be the hero like in our work, and sometimes like we actually like turn ourselves into the villain in the eyes of the client. And learning more about like communication and like relationships, like kind of brings me back to like this idea of like the drama triangle of like the hero and the victim and the villain. And I think the biggest thing is like this kind of way of seeing things has really helped me kind of realize like when I am playing those characters, and helps me like get off the triangle. I feel like the wizard is the one who like stands back and like lets the drama unfold, and then like Dumbledore or like Gandalf like sticks in like a little something like when the time is appropriate. And really like kind of that magician is like the creator of new worlds. And like
can you tell me a little bit more about that triangle, just for everyone who's listening?
So
that we're trying to get off of with our wizardry.
So I feel like I can't remember the lady's name who talks about this, and there's a guy who like invented it. Lots of people talk about it. So it's this idea of the drama triangle, and kind of that we all have this like default like kind of starting place where I think they also call it like the intimidator and the interrogator and the victim, or like kind of the hero and the villain, and like the victim. Sometimes kind of the hero or the interrogator also gets the label of like the caregiver. And so it's kind of like like kind of our baseline like reaction to kind of things that might be happening. And so I think in some ways and it's like I don't, and it's hard to explain, but I'm working on it. And it also
we'll put a link in the show notes also, just for anyone who wants to know more about it.
And it also kind of like talks about like how we like transfer power, and like how like in ways like we can take power away from each other or give up our power. But I think it's kind of like realizing like when are we finding ourselves in those roles, and how do we like stop doing that, and kind of guiding that situation, like really kind of getting out of the loop. And like how it makes me think too of like kind of like the serenity prayer, like the idea of like accepting the things that I cannot change, and like changing the things that I cannot accept, and that wisdom to know the difference. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question very well.
Yeah, no, I think it is. It definitely is. Like these, in sort of times of either conflict or challenge that we tend to fall into these three big roles, like either the hero, like we're fixing it, we're responsible, and or we're the victim and we're always the one being persecuted, and we fall into this role even if it's not always true. And then there's the villain. In my understanding this drama triangle, the villain is always the one doing the wrong thing or hurting everyone else. And so we can like sort of polarize our view of ourselves and the people that we're engaging with in any interaction, make them either into the villain, make ourselves into the hero, and then or make ourselves into the victim that needs to be rescued and that we're completely helpless and everything's terrible has been done to us and it's no fault of our own, right? So there's these kind of extreme roles, and we can kind of polarize ourselves and find ourselves on this drama triangle contributing to it. And I think the way that you explained it to me was, like, you're a wizard, get off that triangle, right? You're outside of that. You're doing magic. You're in the gray zone. You're not polarized. You're like seeing things as they are in reality. And does that sound like your experience of it?
I think so. And I definitely think these are not things that like we do like consciously. And yeah, like the villain is like, like these actions come from like fear or like from defense, and like the caregiver is like trying to help others, and the victim, like, it's kind of that like freeze response. Like there's not things that we do, but it's kind of like this idea, like you've probably heard the quote of like, don't hate the player, like hate the game. Like my take on that is like, if this helps me recognize like I'm hating the players right now, like don't hate the player, like don't even hate the game, like play the game, make up your own rules. Like the rules aren't real.
That's right. That's it.
Yeah. So I feel like that, yeah, it's kind of that like, oh, like I'm taking power away from others right now. Like this, or like, by like telling a client like what you need to do, or like I am sacrificing.
And that would be the hero taking the hero role. Like, I'm here to save you.
Sure. Or perhaps even the villain, like, and like the client might perceive you in that way, or like, like the hero might be like a martyr, like kind of sacrificing themselves, or like in the victim, you might be like this, like, oh, like, woe is me. And like, but yeah, the wizard is able to like take themselves off the triangle and say, here's what I have control over, like my thoughts, my feelings, like my emotions, like here's where I begin and I end. And like, this is what is mine to control. And this is what is out there. And like, I think the wizard kind of realizes like, here's where I can be of service. And then like, here's the boundary. Like people don't know where it is if you don't tell them. To kind of say like, here is where I can show up and pour from my full cup. Yeah, I'm still working on that story.
I mean, aren't we all? Yeah. I mean, not to be like cliche or anything, but it's all such a path. Like we're all working on our boundaries. We're all working on our personal development. We're all working on, empowering others without accidentally taking their power away, or without, feeling we have, things, or giving our power away. And so we've gotten into some like really cool, like esoteric stuff here. And I wanted to kind of second to last question go in a little bit of a different direction. There's just so much I want to talk to you about, and I'm getting the sense that we're going to have you back for a second visit because there's just so much to say. But I wanted, just before we kind of close out of things, I wanted to touch on something that's really cool and interesting about you, and get a little bit of your take on this, and hopefully talk about it more in another podcast in future. Sure. But you've mentioned to me that you're neurodiverse. So I'm wondering, can you tell me a little bit about that and what it's meant for you as a veterinarian? And, if there are any tips you've got for anyone else who considers themselves to be neurodiverse, or, what is it like, or any suggestions, thoughts you have on working with clients who might be neurodiverse? What does that all mean for you? I would just love to kind of have you dump your brain on this subject.
Well, I'm very good at that, and I'll tell you why. So I feel like I'm still like a student of this idea too, because I think it's very new. And I think, like my understanding is that like neurodiversity, like essentially just means that like as humans, like across the population, we have diversity, like normal variation, like in the ways that we think. And I think there are some conditions that have previously been categorized as like diseases or like disorders that maybe are actually like just normal variations on ways of thinking. And so like neurodiversity is like a very big like umbrella term, and like kind of underneath that are these kind of categories of like neurotypical versus like a neurodivergent. So like a neurotypical person would be kind of somebody who like learns and socializes, and like their attention and their moods are like typical of like the average person like in the population. And I think like this term just kind of asks us to take a little bit wider lens, like a wider view of what normal is. And so like some of the things that are under this umbrella like definitely are like chronic diseases, like they do need to be managed like with medications. And there's this entire spectrum of like severity, and there's many diagnoses that fall under this umbrella. So things like ADHD, autism spectrum, dyslexia, other learning abilities, also more serious conditions like epilepsy and Tourette syndrome and bipolar disorder. And so there's all these different things, and essentially like what that means is like there's all these different ways that we think. So this last year at the ripe old age of 35, I got diagnosed with ADHD, and yeah, I've been really learning how to manage that and kind of learn like what that means. I think in a lot of ways, like it's been like a challenging transition to go from like there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, to like no, actually I just like my brain works different than a lot of people. And because of how our world is structured and how things work, like sometimes that makes some things really challenging for me, and I might need to do things a little bit differently than how most people do. And like there's definitely like a wide range of, like I said, all of these things, and the spectrum is not a line, like it's a like a pie, like a whole circle of things. So definitely different levels that these things can present. And like ADHD people do tend to be very creative and very passionate and have lots of energy, as you can probably hear. Also like be able to hyper focus, but it does give challenges in other areas. So I think kind of time management and like memory and sometimes like emotional regulation become difficult. And definitely like with ladies, like there's kind of almost, I think they call it like a lost generation of women, because it does present really differently in girls at a young age than it does in boys. And so, yeah, and I think I kind of found this out because once I had like in-home euthanasia kind of all set up and practice all ready to go, I had all this extra time, and I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, what happened today? Like, I didn't have the days off. I'd be like, I would just go from like one thing to another, and became more and more challenging. And so kind of learned through like seeing my therapist and talking to other people and kind of learning more about it. And so I've been starting to get some coaching and yeah, like working with kind of a team of people to help manage it. I think the biggest things that have been helpful are kind of learning better to like manage my time. I think we were talking earlier about my calendar, and there's like this AM launch sequence, which is like from when I get up to like when I start getting ready to work, of all these like things that I want to do. And I send myself like little reminders, because there is kind of this like time blindness. And definitely
I
like
relate to that very much so.
oh, it's hard. It probably has more time in a day. But yeah, sometimes just get like sucked in. It's like, oh man, like I meant to do this for 4 minutes and it's been 4 hours. And yeah, that it's not a big deal if you don't have somewhere to be, but sometimes that can be very challenging if you do. So being able to, like, it's never been an issue like with work, but yeah, it's kind of like structuring that time around. It's like, oh man, I really want to do this today, and it's not done. And the other, like another big thing is like memory. And so I think like with ADHD, like it's not so much you can't pay attention, it's just like there's so much to pay attention to that it's hard to like filter it all. And so I have lists like everywhere and just like, oh, this is something I thought of, or like just in the notes like in my phone, to be able to like get those things out of my head so I don't like forget to do it later, especially if it's something important. And then yeah, the other thing is really kind of recognizing like emotions and like kind of why certain feelings come up, or like why I have like different reactions. Like there's this thing called rejection sensitive dysmorphia. And so like I always know like I'm kind of a sensitive person, but it's yeah, like sometimes like react more than like an average or like quote unquote normal person would, or like take things very personally. And like looking back kind of in early practice, I kind of recognized like, oh, these symptoms have been present for a long time. And yeah, I think we get to it, we can mask really well, we can adapt really well, but I think if it does get to a point where it feels like life is hard to manage, especially with some of those like emotional, like communication sort of things, like executive function kind of stuff, like it's definitely something to look into, because I think it is probably more common than we realize, especially in ladies, especially in like high functioning people. Like
I agree with that. There's I've met a bunch of veterinarians recently, and a majority of them house call veterinarians, which has been really interesting to me, who have mentioned to me, hey, I'm neurodiverse or I'm on the spectrum. And like I don't really know how to identify that, but it's really an interesting subject that's sort of come up and kind of come into my come into visibility a little bit more in the last few years. And it's just so interesting that you know, just to kind of explore that world a little bit, and the world of neurodiversity and your experience with it. And it kind of piqued my interest that a lot of people that I've now noticed to kind of identify as neurodiverse or on the spectrum are house call veterinarians. And I think that's really interesting to me, because I think we kind of tend to do things outside the box. We need to do things on our terms. And I think it makes sense to have something a little bit outside the average, kind of going in the direction of doing our own businesses and taking matters into our own hands and working on our own terms with our own brains. And you know, I don't know if I have a neurodiversity or on some spectrum. I could be, I don't know, but I do relate very much to the time management issue. Loss of perception of time. Like I could think it's 4 minutes or it could be 4 hours. I relate to that, which is really interesting. And part of, for me, one of the reasons I love being a house call vet, because I can go ahead and take 4 hours if I want. I can remove the clock from my experience, you know, and the experience of my clients.
I think if your brain does work in that different way, like the 8 to 5 is not going to cut it. Like I feel like the purest form of torture for me would be to like work in a cube. To be able to have that, at least to be able to create that space where you can have that creative time. And and really learning like, oh, like I'm not broken, there's not something wrong with me, my brain just works differently. And because of the way that the world is set up, kind of that universal versus the personal like view, like that makes it challenging for me. It's not, there's nothing wrong, it's just how it is. And so like, how can I really like hack into like my strengths and delegate my weaknesses?
Exactly. I love that. I really love that. And I think that's going to be really helpful for other veterinarians to hear, especially house call veterinarians, that, you know, our brains are very different. There's tremendous neurodiversity and cognitive diversity in humanity and within veterinarians. And therefore there's space for all of us to do our own things. And so, yeah, thank you so much for that. And I definitely want to have you back and talk a little bit more about that, because I know it's important. And I know a lot of veterinarians want to hear from you and about that specific subject. And so just in closing, before we do that, for anyone who's watching this on YouTube, I would love if you could show your little calendar scheduler thing, like that is so incredibly rainbow beautiful. Because
I'm not gonna put this on YouTube. That's very okay. Yeah,
it's beautiful.
This is my life.
From the mind of Dr. Doran. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. And in summary, since we are in a cafe in this podcast, can you tell me, what is your favorite tea, coffee, or beverage to drink? Anything that you take with you either on the road or just to relax and chill at home while you're doing your magic? I'd love for you to share what you've got in your cup, in your goblet.
Yes, I would love to. And I'd also at the same time ask you to ponder a question. And maybe this is something we discuss another time or like ask other people too. But I think in light of the House Call Vet Cafe, I want to ask you, if you were a coffee shop, what would it look like? What would be like the mood, the furniture, the setting, the people that you would attract? What would you serve? What would your role be in this coffee shop?
Oh, as a person, as a human being, like
Yeah,
the
so
coffee shop manifestation of.
yes, the coffee shop as a representation of your persona.
Oh, that is such an interesting question. And
So do not answer now, like take
yeah.
your time, but we're going to revisit that at another time. But I read about this the other day and I thought about you. I was like, oh my gosh, we have to talk about this. Okay. But so I have like a hot beverage routine of the day. I have an espresso machine and it is the best thing ever. And so usually like getting up in the morning, I have like a little double shot, like kind of macchiato action, like a little splash of milk. And then usually like a late morning, like jasmine green tea. Usually there's an afternoon coffee, which I'm enjoying here now. And then often a decaffeinated tea beverage in the evening. So I really enjoy that Tazo passion tea, or like a peppermint or like a cinnamon, something like this. But hot beverages all day.
That sounds delightful. I love it. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Thank you for all you do for animals and for humans and for me as a friend. It's, it's so clear to see that you're an incredible person and advocate for animals and, just a really compassionate person. And so thank you for your time today. I'm super excited to have you as a friend and a colleague in our mobile vet tribe. And cheers to our next podcast episode where we will explore more on neurodivergence. Thank you for speaking with me today.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the House Call Vet Cafe. If you enjoyed this episode, then hit the subscribe or follow button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never have to miss an episode. This podcast is made specifically for you, so don't be shy if you'd like to reach out and let me know your thoughts on this episode. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook as the House Call Vet Academy, where I also share more valuable content. If you're interested in learning more about consulting for house call vets or the House Call Vet Academy online course and community, please click on the link in the show notes. Have an amazing rest of your day, and I can't wait for you to join us for our next episode of the House Call Vet Cafe.